Welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something really exciting. We're going to completely demystify Warren Buffett's unbelievable track record. We hear that name, Oracle of Omaha, thrown around all the time, right? But right now, we're rolling up our sleeves to look at the actual step-by-step blueprint of exactly how that legend was constructed. It's like decoding a masterclass in wealth.
Let's just start right out of the gate with a massive provocative question. How exactly do you turn $9,800 into a $150 billion fortune? And how do you do it without relying on, speculative gambling or chasing trends? It's literally a staggering transformation. But keep in mind, this wasn't magic. There was no lucky lottery ticket here. It was a meticulously crafted method that took well over 70 years of relentless patience to unfold.
Just listen to the sheer, unadulterated ambition of a 12-year-old boy who hadn't even learned his legendary methods yet. If I'm not a millionaire by age 30, I'll jump off the tallest building in Omaha. Wow, right? It's a funny, slightly dramatic line, for sure, but it reveals this very real, very intense inner drive. He was absolutely clear about his destination from day one. He literally just needed to find the right vehicle to get him there.
All right, so here's our roadmap for today. 1. The early entrepreneur. 2. Enter Benjamin Graham. 3. The Buffett partnership. 4. The Berkshire Hathaway acquisition. And finally, 5. The evolution of value.
Part 1. The early entrepreneur. Hustle and ambition.
11. Think about that for a second. That is the exact age Warren Buffett bought his very first stock. While most kids that age are just playing outside, young Warren was already dipping his toes into the stock market. And this wasn't just some fleeting, passing interest. This was the absolute genesis of a lifelong obsession with business and capital allocation.
You see, his entire childhood was basically defined by these relentless side hustles. We're talking selling chewing gum, Coca-Cola, magazines, door to door. But my absolute favorite is the used golf balls. So he famously bought these barely used, classy golf balls from Chicago for $3.50 a dozen and then flipped them locally for $6. He solved a real supply chain issue for his little retail business, pocketed a really tidy profit, and honestly was already mastering the mechanics of profit margins before he even hit high school.
Part 2. Enter Benjamin Graham. The cheat code.
So, fun fact, he actually got rejected by Harvard Business School, mostly because they told him he looked about 16 years old. But that rejection was a huge blessing in disguise, because it led him to discover the book that literally changed his life, The Intelligent Investor. Buffett has straight up called it the best book about investing ever written. For him, it served as the absolute rule book to wealth and his formal introduction to value investing. It handed him the exact mental framework his ambitious mind had been desperately searching for.
Once he realized the authors of that book actually taught at Columbia Business School, well, he packed up and headed straight to Columbia to study under the main author himself, Benjamin Graham. And the dynamic in that classroom? Utterly electric. Graham taught using the Socratic style, but it quickly morphed into a two-man show with Buffett just constantly raising his hand. And yeah, he eventually graduated in 1951, walking away with the only A+ Benjamin Graham ever awarded to anyone.
Now, fully grasping this concept of intrinsic value was, without a doubt, Graham's greatest lesson to him. Basically, it means treating a stock as fractional ownership in an actual, breathing business, not just a flickering green or red ticker on a screen. You calculate the true, underlying worth based on hard fundamentals. If the market price falls meaningfully below that intrinsic value, well, that provides what Graham famously called a margin of safety. You buy it, you sit back and wait, and over time, economic reality wins out.
Part 3. The Buffett partnership. Testing the theory.
His maturation after Columbia was incredibly rapid. After graduating in '51, he actually offered to work for Graham for free. But believe it or not, he was initially turned down. So he just kept pestering Graham with different securities ideas until 1954, when he finally got hired at Graham Newman in New York. Then, when his mentor retired, Buffett headed back home to Omaha. This all culminated in 1956 with the launch of the Buffett partnership, starting with a mere $105,000 pooled together from family and friends.
It's kind of amusing to think about now, but he recorded those initial million-dollar-making investments in a humble 49-cent ledger. Seriously, no flashy Wall Street office for him. In fact, he rented a house in Omaha for just $175 a month, specifically because he refused to tie up his precious investing capital in a mortgage. Every single spare dollar he had was meant for one thing and one thing only: compounding.
And he didn't mess around with his investors. He handed out strict ground rules to his partners, promising them only one update letter a year. He bluntly told them he didn't want soft fruit thrown at him if his portfolio was down 5% while the broader market was down 15%. Basically, he demanded they align with his ultra-long-term view and just trust the process. And they did. The result? He proceeded to compound that money at roughly 25% annually for 13 straight years.
Part 4. The Berkshire Hathaway Acquisition. A cigar butt. Okay, but what would you do if the very company you bought to scale your wealth was, actually, a dying business? Well, in 1962, he bought into this struggling textile mill up in Massachusetts called Berkshire Hathaway. Why? Simply because it was statistically dirt cheap. It was a classic Graham-style cigar butt, meaning, think of it like finding a discarded, soggy cigar on the street. It's ugly, it's pretty ruined, but hey, it has one free, profitable puff left in it. Treating it just $7.50 a share, but sitting on $16.50 in working capital, mathematically, it was the absolute perfect bargain. He ultimately took full control of the company in 1965, but here's the catch. The U.S. textile industry was just fundamentally broken by then. He later admitted, with a good bit of self-deprecating humor, that those failing mills actually made this his absolute worst purchase, famously calling it the dumbest stock I ever bought. But you know what? That painful realization forced a massive, world-changing strategic pivot. He learned the hard way that you simply can't just buy dying businesses no matter how cheap they look on a spreadsheet.
Which brings us to Part 5, the evolution of value, from butts to quality.
That painful hurdle with the textile mills forged his ultimate legacy-defining strategy. Heavily influenced by his brilliant, longtime partner Charlie Munger, Buffett shifted completely away from Graham's rigid statistical bargains. He left behind those cigar butts, which were really just fair businesses at great prices. Instead, Munger convinced him to buy great businesses at fair prices. Quality began to matter just as much as deep value. This pivot is perfectly highlighted by their famous $25 million acquisition of See's Candies, a brand with incredible pricing power.
And guys, that single, profound philosophical shift is exactly what transformed Berkshire Hathaway into a staggering $1 trillion conglomerate by the time he stepped down as CEO at the end of 2025. He literally used the cash flow from that original, struggling textile mill to build a massive holding company, scooping up major stakes in exceptional, world-class businesses like Apple, American Express, and Coca-Cola. Ultimately, when you really look at it, his phenomenal success was never some Wall Street magic trick. It was the heavily disciplined, lifelong practice of buying great businesses at fair prices and then just stepping back and letting time do the heavy lifting. He always says his favorite holding period is forever. He weathered vicious bear markets, global crises, and wild dot-com bubbles by simply ignoring the noise and focusing purely on the underlying fundamentals of the incredible businesses he owned. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to ask yourself, how can you apply the Oracle's relentless patience and focus on long-term compounding to your own life and investments? Can you block out the frantic daily noise of the market to focus on true underlying value? Thank you so much for joining me today to unpack the brilliant, methodical mind of Warren Buffett. Keep focusing on the long term, and I'll see you in the next explainer.